No publisher is giving an IGN reviewer a bunch of money to influence a review score. There are ways that companies try to manipulate positive review scores in ways that I think are extremely egregious and actually far worse than I think the general public realizes. Like, this stuff is huge. I'm gonna make a whole separate video about this. I was gonna put it in this video, but then it's like too many topics in one video. It's a lot.
I think there is some evidence of a bias, that there's a tendency for companies like IGN to rate either AAA related games on a 7 to 10 scale, or politically advantageous games exclusively on a 7 to 10 scale, because it's a way of pushing things. For one thing, there's the advertising on video game websites from these big companies that often represents a conflict of interest. But we don't have to get into that factor. That's not explicitly bribing a company, but it is funding a company through advertising. And it is a company paying indirectly to another company that's reviewing their products. So it's not like explicit bribery, but if you bash them too hard, they could decide to not advertise on your website. That's where the conflict of interest comes in. So a contrasting example I like to give, that I think it depends how much they want to suck up to the company, is this Starfield 7 out of 10. Remember, it's like 59% positive on Steam. So I'd say even 7 out of 10 is too high. He kind of bashes it in the review if you go over it. But then compare that to Starfield, IGN Japan, 10 out of 10, masterpiece. I'm kind of wondering why there's such a disparaging difference there. It seems kind of opposite extremes for one company. I understand that there's different people reviewing the game, but I would say both reviews are way too high for something that the nicest thing I could say about Starfield is it seems like a big game with a ton of content ripped out of it, and it was still fairly buggy. So 59% positive on Steam feels kind of appropriate way to rank it. But that's the critics versus the audience. So Star Wars Outlaws, people are debating whether or not Ubisoft is dying as a company, and it doesn't sound like Outlaws was doing too well commercially. And it a big issue with it that people have been bringing up is it's a stealth focused game, but there's issues with the AI kind of bugging out, and that is extremely important for a stealth focused game, that your AI is good. So that's already a pretty serious issue to have. And we've seen stuff like Metal Gear Solid do kind of open world stealth stuff well. So it's not as if nobody on Earth can do that. But okay, Fallout 76, 7 out of 10. Probably the most divisive Fallout game or Bethesda game to ever get released. But there you go. It's comparable to Starfield. It's comparable to Star Wars Outlaws by this kind of metric. Stellar Blade. A lot of people were debating, is this going to be the game of the year? 7 out of 10. You know, I didn't get to try it personally. I can't have much of an opinion about it myself. Below that, Sandland, I tried it. I think it's a good game. Around the time this game released, people were getting into the Sweet Baby Inc. stuff. And there was a guy who worked for SBI who was hating on Toriyama like immediately after his death was publicly announced. So I have to wonder if there was some bias just from some overt Toriyama hate that was going around at the time. But regardless, you'll see why 6 out of 10 seems kind of weird. So 7 out of 10, this is at least a recent Nintendo game that came out. It's the Princess Peach Nintendo game. I can't say if it's accurate. Didn't try the game. It might be accurate. But we're using this all as a comparative measuring stick. What IGN considers to be a 7 out of 10. The First Descendant. Commercially very successful. It seems to be doing well for being from a smaller developer. And it's 5 out of 10. Compare that to Concord, kind of similar in that these are both multiplayer shooters. Concord currently being received as the biggest commercial failure in recent history, and people are wondering if this is going to kill Firewalk Studios entirely. I don't know if they announced anything about the closure of the studio yet, but didn't really even last like a week. And all the money got refunded. Still, 7 out of 10. Biggest commercial failure in recent history. First Descendant, 5 out of 10. The exact same person reviewing both. Dustborn. A lot of people accuse this of being political propaganda. It's certainly very political, and it was funded by grants partially from the Norwegian government. I think a little bit from the American government as well. Just government grants were partly backing this. 7 out of 10. It's had dozens of people play it. So, that doesn't sound like it's doing all that commercially well to me, but it kind of depends. Black Myth Wukong, something else people are debating as like game of the year material, and it's 8 out of 10. Another 8 out of 10 game, Immortals of Avium. What was previously considered to be one of the biggest commercial failures in video game history, only to be outdone by things like Concord and Dustborn, in that at least more people were playing Immortals of Avium than, I believe, Dustborn or Concord. I think like 80 concurrent players. Well, that's not more than Concord was the entire time, because Concord did better than that. But this was more successful than Dustborn. But still, a lot of people were saying this was the biggest commercial failure in recent history. Black Myth Wukong, same thing. According to IGN. Okay, if there isn't some kind of bias associated with critics, then why do we always consistently see such a gap between user reviews and critical reviews? If the critic reviews were effective, I think user reviews would tend to be kind of similar and support that, because the idea of a 7 out of 10 would be consistently perceived between both the general public and critics, and it would be entirely unnecessary to educate the public about what a correct review score is. Like, why do you need to tell us what a 7 out of 10 means? It obviously means that IGN's scale is wrong if nobody understands what a 7 out of 10 is.